Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. Thrilled to be sharing some time with a wonderful friend, Dr. Joseph Clair. Joseph serves at George Fox University as the executive dean of the cultural enterprise, which encompasses the humanities, theology, and education. He's also the dean of the College of Humanities and an associate professor of theology and culture before George Fox, which was in 2013. Before that, he earned his PhD in religion and ethics in the program at Princeton University, while also working as an assistant in instruction. His efforts were rewarded with the Department of Religion Teaching Award and a Graduate Prize Fellowship from Princeton's Center for Human Values. Prior to Princeton, Clair earned a Master's of Philosophy from University of Cambridge as a Gates Cambridge Scholar. He holds master's degrees from Fordham and Duke University and a bachelor's from Wheaton College. Research interests and teaching interests include Christian thought and ethics and the role of religion in public life. And he's the author of Discerning the Good, the Letters and Sermons of Augustine, and Reading Augustine on Education, Formation, Citizenship, and the Lost Purpose of Learning. Joseph lives on a hobby farm outside of Newberg, Oregon, with his wife Nora and their 4 children. And that is maybe the most beautiful part of the entire country, in my opinion. So, Joseph, you get to live right there. Thanks for hanging out with us. I appreciate it.
So good to be here, Zach. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking out your window, and over one shoulder, you've got the institutional life there at George Fox, and on the other shoulder, the Willamette River, which is absolutely beautiful, especially this time of year. But this is like wrapping up an academic year. I remember when you landed at George Fox or were just in the life of George Fox, your roles kind of evolved over the years. Give a quick, just high level glimpse of George Fox because it's a beautiful campus. A lot of people who are listening they don't know George Fox, they don't know that part of the country. So give a quick scope of what's the university like and then your role and how's it evolved since you've been there.
Yeah, George Fox is a gem, as I know we both believe. Been here since 1891, founded by really evangelical Quakers, and there's still a bit of that heritage here, but very Christ-centered, alive university, the largest private university in the state of Oregon this year by just a hair over the University of Portland. It's about half grad and half undergrad, 4,000 some students. And the undergrad experience would feel similar to a strong Christian liberal arts college experience at Wheaton or Gordon, 2,200 students, mostly residential, beautiful campus. The difference is we moved into professional and vocational programs earlier than many schools. So nursing is our largest major right now, followed by, engineering, kinesiology, pre-physical therapy. So that is balanced by the kind of traditional liberal arts and history and different things. But I'd say it's a really beautiful blend of Christ-centered education that's aimed at character formation of the whole person, deep culture. So Christianity and culture is our motto. So how does faith illuminate understanding of all of life and reality? But then also calling or vocation. We want our students to have a livelihood in a way in the world. So it's a really special spot. I got to start the honors program here 11 years ago, first job faculty person. It's a great books honors program, and it's a replacement of your traditional gen ed or core curriculum. You can major in anything you want. It's actually busting at the seams this year. We have more interest than ever in freshmen wanting to study the great books, but then also study engineering or business or literature, biology. So that's exciting. And that's a very traditional classical Christian kind of seminar table, Harkness table, only reading the primary text, discussing them deeply for a couple hours twice a week, kind of an old school model of Christian liberal arts education that parallels, whatever, innovative, forward-looking career preparation you want to do here. So really kind of beautiful blend of the old and the new. And yeah, been missional. The missional vibe here is that the faculty and staff are very on board with the Christ-centered mission of the institution, including a solid kind of historical, classical faith statement of belief in the triune God. But students don't necessarily have to be Christians. So there's a hospitality and a kind of welcome that has been in our DNA since the beginning as well. So yeah, special place, and is for the time being defying some of the harder enrollment trends that a lot of our peers have been struggling through. So that's just been a gift.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been from what I've seen, the introduction of that Great Books program and your work there, I think that probably was a seed that was planted that's now helping to be generative in the whole ecosystem of the university. So I think well done by the university to embed that program, because it's probably giving life in a beautiful way now, 11 years later. A few years ago during COVID, we were talking, and I think the on the table was like, what's going to happen to higher ed? Like, is it going to go online forever because the world's forever changed? Is that going to move that way just because of the pragmatic economic engine behind universities trying to scale it such a way through online education? And at the time, you were saying there's something about a smaller program. There's something about proximity, embodiment, the way of learning that we're going to have to wrestle through. There's a complexity there that you can't escape. I remember you saying that. I've talked to several of the people who are leading other universities, and I come back to that and I hear the same thing, that there's kind of a orientation back from the people who are leading institutions. But I hear that in you saying that the Great Books program there is attracting students. What's drawing them when they come to you and are looking for that? What do you think's driving their desire to kind of turn that direction as well?
Uh, I I I think it's the counter formation to the kind of disembodiment and distraction and toxicity of being raised by smartphones. I think you can kind of write off, Gen Z. We're moving into Gen Alpha here, I guess, as far as digital natives, and they're absorbed. My sense in talking to students is that they're, depending on their family formation, which at the end of the day, the formation of your family and connected to your local church makes all the difference. But even so, by the time you get to high school and college, the seeds have been planted, or you have a revulsion to the deformation of the culture and the kind of shallowness and hollowness and sort of viciousness of being stuck in the digital arena. And a call, so the honors program, yeah, is sort of deep dive detox. It's like no tech in the classrooms, 2 hours and 40 minutes twice a week, just close reading, close discussion, careful analysis. It sort of gets that part of your soul moving again. And yeah, it's a both and. I think I admire the schools that are these hardcore kind of no tech, 4-year liberal arts, ride a horse, get up in the mountains. I dream of that some ways. I also think there's kind of a both and, where you can do the counter formation, do the soul formation, but also be in the world but not of it. You're going to be a computer scientist and code for part of your life, and so how are you going to do that in a way that keeps the discipline? And I would say that's part of the draw. There's also, in times of tremendous cultural decline and collapse and chaos and decay and all the things that you kind of feel politically and socially, there's I think, a hunger to return to the sources of things. And you feel that in evangelicals interested in the ancient church, or forming a rule of life and inhabiting the spiritual disciplines, because I think the forces of deformation, through just the intoxication of technology and the forces of kind of chaos and disorder and amnesia, as a society, I think actually whets the appetite for some of those things. So that'd be my sense.
Yeah. I think that's why I was so excited to just get time with you. And I really appreciate at the end of your academic year making time for a conversation like this, because lots of us as parents are in conversations like that with our kids as they're making choices about university life. And there's an incredible amount of pressure to just kind of repeat what maybe parents have done or their experience was, or what was helpful for a vocational life or a career track in the past. So there's still an immense amount of cross pressure, it seems, to participate in that way. And yet there's at the same time that deformation has taken place and has become acute in its pain points to the point that families are going, I don't know. And we hear stories of kids who go off to great universities, big schools, and within the first year, they're just anxiety ridden. They don't know what they're doing there. Their values and are being shifted radically in a direction that is confusing to them and their families and disruptive. And we've just seen that so many times that I think people are coming back going, okay, what are the options? And I have tried to send my kids or suggest to my kids that they go ride horses in the mountains and read great books. And they're not super excited about it. So I like the idea that there's a university that's a both and Cammie and I were just over in Oxford and walking around there and talking to some students there, and they were saying, "Oh, look at this! We have such a beautiful vision of a university life. Small universities nested within an ecosystem." All this great stuff, but the tradition itself of the school, the bones are there, but the heart is not. And so there's this really cool opportunity to reimagine the university and the place in its formation of persons, and that there's value in that and that it's worth investing. And I think that's been a question for a lot of people is, do we even pay for college? Is it even worth, is there a return on investment? And I think now more than ever, parents are saying, I think there's something really beautiful that's supposed to happen that we hope happens, but that doesn't seem to be what is produced through these big machine university programs. And that's why I picked up the Liberating Arts. You wrote a contribution with a collection of great other authors who are all thinking about the liberal arts and why we need that tradition in education and what does that even mean. And that's what I wanted to dig into that a little bit with you. And then on the backside, kind of talk about some beauty things. But you wrote on kind of a contrasting vision of truth you and justice you and Jesus you, or a Christian vision of education. Maybe to start, give us a high level of like what you were trying to paint a picture of, because we're in a moment where we're trying to feel our way through those options. What are those options that parents maybe not have language for, but they're navigating those three? Set the context with a little bit of what you were writing, and then we'll kind of pull on some threads.
There's a amazing talk by Jonathan Haidt at the Duke, I think, politics department, kind of contrasting modern universities. He's the author of The Anxious Generation, great new book on the deformation of being raised by your phone. But he kind of pulls apart the two modern predominant options of universities. One is rooted in an Enlightenment 18th century view of human reason that is secular, not shaped by religion or, beholden to the authority of faith in any way, but still pursues truth rapidly through, logic and math and science and empirical study. And that was really the foundation of a lot of the great, German research universities that shaped a lot of American universities. And there's a kind of freedom of thought and truth pursuit at the heart of those. University of Chicago might be the best like version of it in the States, but there clearly was an Enlightenment. There was a rejection of the Enlightenment by a counter-Enlightenment romantic movement within a generation in the 19th century, and that shapes figures like Marx critiquing, the power structures and suppression of the proletariat. Thinkers like Nietzsche and his reading of like, there's no truth in the world, it's just power, people like defeating each other with words and arguments. Or Freud, there's this dark subconscious, that's actually acting on everyone. And so this is this kind of feast of unreason and postmodernism that rejects the Enlightenment. Now, the thread of that's probably most predominant in the modern university, Haidt says, is the justice instinct. And so instead of pursuing a refined, grasp of reality and pursuit of truth through reason and empirical research, we are fundamentally trying to diagnose and name the systems of poison and oppression, in society. And so that provides a lot of moral energy. So every paper in every class becomes about telling the story that was not told, and the undoing of the kind of great systems of oppression. So like a caricature of this is like, We used to have classes in Western civilization as part of your core curriculum. Now we have classes about how bad Western civilization and a bunch of dead white guys who are suppressing everyone else. And it's such a one-sided, lopsided, like flip to flop. And so students who are getting arrested on the great quads of our universities in Columbia and Yale this week represent that's a complicated story, obviously, about Hamas and Gaza and Israel. But if you read the details, it speaks to a kind of one-dimensional sense of the moral universe, which is very much shaped by a kind of Marxist understanding of social justice, and that's what university is about. And so I think Haidt is right. And I think in some ways, those are the two options in a secular sort of university possibility. And they're going to eclipse each other or run out of gas. And I think the deeper challenge for them is that neither of them has an animating picture of what a human being is and what the purpose of education is and how education, whether K-12 or higher ed or anything, contributes to the overall flourishing of being fully human, humanity, recovering and discovering and enhancing your humanity through the study of the humanities. Like no one has a guiding conception for the overarching work of education, which is super costly and hard and expensive. And so you have a fragmented, disconnected, incoherent picture of knowledge, which can be salvaged for a while by having it all be about career preparation. So I think there you get the flip toward, well, okay, maybe we don't really know what the value of the liberal arts are or how all these different discourses talk to each other. But if we can just make sure everyone has a job on the other end, we can justify our existence. But increasingly, you find people wondering if it's worth the time and opportunity cost to do it. You have digital ways, you have trade and vocational. So there's a real rediscovery of the trades going on. So what I wanted to do in the piece was simply suggest the Christian vision of education and learning, which gave rise to the university in the late Middle Ages and early modern and early American period, was fundamentally a picture of the human person who is made in the image of God and loves to learn because we want to learn about this God and this God's world. And we are created not just in the image of God, but in the image of the Word Himself, the Logos. And we want to know the Word in Scripture, but also the Word, which is all throughout creation. And so there's this vision and this beautiful way in which our learning about the world and our knowledge of God leads us out of ourselves to love our neighbors. And that picture of how learning contributes to our overall flourishing as human beings is coherent. Things are connected. There's a sense where character is connected to vocation and calling. And I call this Jesus U, which is what Haidt actually calls it, sort of nicknames, the Christian religious colleges that still have some animating picture. Now, what I think the challenge is that it's not just an end run back around the modern and postmodern universities to a medieval classical Christian vision. You somehow have to figure out how does this come into the present day and represent a winsome alternative to, I think, the chaos and incoherence. And I think renewing a true purpose-driven or teleological picture of the human person that makes sense of education, but also finding a way to make it affordable and accessible to a broad swath of people. That's the challenge, right? I mean, as beautiful as the Oxford bones of the model of the college within the university and chapel every day and all these things, it was fundamentally structured around a kind of elite audience that has costs that are just so unwieldy and out of control for a broad population. And so in some ways, higher education in the US did this beautiful thing of like democratizing the possibility of education for a broad public, but the costs were out of sync with what people can actually cope with or what institutions can sustain over the long haul. And so there's a real right sizing going on in higher education. So I would say to parents, I'd say to myself, as we look in the next couple of years at thinking about college for our kids, is how do you find that right, beautiful blend of an animating picture of the purpose of education and the formation of your student, your child, that's connected to a viable way and livelihood in the world, and also is something that's like reasonable in terms of the costs and the potential debt, that you're going to have to negotiate as you move forward. It's like getting that blend right is really hard. And I can only say, I think at George Fox, we're doing our best to kind of keep those three things together.
Yeah, that's so helpful. We feel that, right? Especially when you read headlines like we're out this week about Colombia and thing. You see that, you feel it. I think everybody is intuitively going, that's what we've become kind of, we're pushing back from the university life that kind of cultivates that or stokes that. I think everybody, even donors, are saying that's not helpful, and we've got to offer something that's more helpful. And it is a complicated story, but we can find our way to something that's more helpful. On the other side, that without aim of human flourishing, a teleological, what does it mean to be a person? Dumping big money for a career track in a university, the challenge seems to be that students get partway through that and they don't have a vision for what it is to be a person. And so they just go, I think I'm out. Like, even if this is good, it's not a sufficient good to keep doing it. And I don't know if I want to come out with a good job, not knowing why I have a job. And that's that's a tougher thing for a university to kind of re help a student at that stage in life reimagine that. Are you finding that with kids who are arriving at George Fox, young adults who are arriving at George Fox, and they know why they're there, or maybe their parents know why they're there, but they don't, it's kind of a blank slate, and you're having to put back or reintroduce what maybe a while ago people had that. Are you finding that kids don't have that vision? And if so, how does, at a university stage, how do you start to reconstruct a vision of what it is to be a person?
Absolutely. It's a wonderful way to set up the dilemma. And I do think the kind of cost and career consciousness, which people rightly have, when you're stewarding your finances and your student's future, it eliminates and erodes the exploratory formative beginning part of college, which a lot of us experienced, where you're given license and leeway to ask questions of like, what am I passionate about and interested in, and try a few different subjects and weave your way around. It's really like the most strong version of the value proposition in the enrollment kind of strategy here is like, you are in the nursing program and here is a lockstep curricular map of day one to day 365, and guaranteed $82,000 job on the other side. All of that reassures me as a prospective parent of a college student, but it may be out of sync with the formative process, because I don't think as much as I think there'll be alternative ways to get a degree or get a job and all these things, I think the initiation into adulthood and the rite of passage and the kind of moment where all the formation that's gone before now needs to be like owned and endorsed by the student as an adult, as a human in the world, like that beautiful shared kind of mentoring, sort of baton passing and loco parentis process of college. To lose that, I'm like, where else will that happen? And I do think I see some prospects in gap years and alternative ways to do the formation and then just send your student off for a cheaper, quicker career preparation. But I think that loses the integrative experience of college, where your moral and spiritual fibers are being woven with your intellectual fibers and your vocational professional fibers. It's one conversation of, who am I? Who is God? What am I supposed to do in the world? And how do I get there from here? Like that coherent conversation, how you steward that, but how you do it in a way, yeah, that's not just a absolute luxury good that's out of reach, unless you get straddled with unbelievable debt. But I think that's a hazard of the career orientation that we've taken in curriculum at colleges, is that it erodes some of that process of formation and exploration. Now, I think the sweet spot is if you can weave together what's going on in the residence hall and the chapel and the first year seminar experience, and those things, that there are a lot of people on campus, I think, trying to have that kind of mentoring formative conversation with students, especially early on in their time, but they're often out of sync with each other, reduplicating the same thing. And so what we're trying to do in this next couple years is to have a really coherent kind of entree first 2 year experience where people have a strong sense of who's Christ, who am I, what am I called to, how do I fit into the world, so that that part of formation doesn't all need to happen through your core curriculum. It can happen in sweet conversations between you and a student upper class mentor in your residence hall, but you just want to make sure that that's happening and that it's guided in a deep way. And yeah, and I think the final thing I'll say is it does feel like a lot of that work, which I just named, I think is important and hard, but it's made much more difficult and challenging by the hyper isolation and individualism and mental health kind of challenges that are the byproduct partly of the phone. And so, yeah, when you're just trying to get students to interact with each other face to face and deal with crippling anxiety, it's like that's the first hurdle before you can get to the deep vocation and formation conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's interesting because from our view, you look at just culture in general and you say, if politics has a vision of common good and persons, that has a high view of persons, a high view of community justice, like a purposeful, why behind what does it mean to be a city and a community. If that's there, if then you have the local church at an institutional level, and that's really what we're talking about, as an ecosystem of institutions that are all oriented towards a higher vision of what it means to be a person, and therefore what it means to be a neighbor, and what our responsibility is as a being. It's not a college or a university itself can't do that. You have to have churches who are illuminating that beautiful vision of the human person, beautiful vision of an incarnational participation with God in the world, that then transmits to families that see themselves as a little ecosystem that is doing that, nested within cities. If all of that, and here's the hopeful thing that I see, is that every part of that, everybody I talk to in government, education, family, the church, everyone is hungering. It's like all of creation is groaning for that, right? And it seems like in our moment, it's dark and there's a lot of people going, man, I'm exhausted and we've run out of gas, to use your language. And I think that's actually good, because people are finally looking around again going, okay, we can do this. And we look back to look forward. People are starting to go, let's return back to the sources that, we don't have to make this up from scratch. Like, what has helped us in the past? And I loved reading, your book on the purpose of education. You say everybody should read Confessions and go back to these sources. You mentioned the Middle Ages, and not just redoing it or trying to return back and put something together that no longer exists. But when you think about why the great books, you say everybody should read the great, participate in a great books program at some level, or at your home, do some great books reading, but that everybody should read the Confessions. Say more about that. I'm curious, just for that person who's saying, I agree with you, I hear this, I'll aim at a university life, and I want to come back to definition of liberal arts. But why do you encourage just that reading from sources, primary sources, as maybe a starting point that could, if I'm a pastor and I return back to that in the church, what might that give to my church? If I'm a city council person, imagining what it is to be in a community and in a city, what benefit is there to us now to look back?
Yeah. The real presentism of technology, uh, it'd be hard to overstate probably the cultural change and disruption of the internet, and then the phone, 10 or 14 years ago, bring the internet into our stream of consciousness in our pockets, and then all the kind of expansion of it. And there's some drawbacks. There's also some amazing things that have been made possible, obviously, but there is a real future orientation and presentism about the kind of material technological advances that make you just feel like, well, man, they didn't have smartphones in ancient Rome, you know, they must not have really got it in the way we do. And that's the irony of human life, is that there's certain parts of our existence and world and experience that you don't make the same quantum leaps of progress over time with. And I think education is central. So you're asking the big questions, and unfortunately, you don't make big progressive advances and leaps on questions of what is a good person and what is beauty and what is justice. They're eternal. They're impenetrable in some ways, and every generation has to ask and answer them again and again. And in some ways, we might be more morally corrupt and decayed than the late Roman Empire. I mean, it'd be hard to judge, you know, when you look at our politics and society in some ways. So, how is that? And I think that there's a recalcitrance to human nature in a Christian theological perspective of human nature. I think I learned this from you. It's really good, but it's broken. And there's a way to understand the study of human beings and the human good and the good of society in ways that make it perpetually interesting, but also really hard to get in advance on. And so I think that, yeah, you might say in computer science, you know, because of AI and the advance we've made with machine learning, it's outmoded, you know, some previous version of, you know, Alan Turing's thought or whatever. That's just not true about the question, what is a good person? What is a good society? And so it's as C.S. Lewis said at his preface to Athanasius, which I love. It's like, you want real diversity of perspective. It's not just about racial, ethnic, or economic lines. It's historical diversity of perspective. And you need to keep the clean sea breeze of the ages blowing through your mind and your heart so that you can be aware of your own blind spots. In the same
Mm.
way as a certain, you know, race and economic status and gender, I could have total blind spots to the experience of others that I am trying to be aware of and work on. You can have cultural and historical ones over time. And so whether you're a person of faith or not, I think that's a kind of call to intellectual diversity and charity and awareness that's good, including, you know, from a historical perspective, I think one of the worst things going on for us is a divestment of our appreciation of Western civilization and the sources of Western civilization, because there's no way to understand our democratic institutions apart from the picture of the human person as dignified and made in the image of God and all the things that gave rise to American Revolution and civil rights movement. To just think I'm going to cut myself off from an understanding of those sources and those texts is like truly damaging, and you know, sawing off your own branch sort of as a culture. So I even if you want to have a more critical perspective of what it means to be made in the image of God and the biblical picture of Imago Dei, you should at least understand what the Bible says about being made in the image of God and how that animated, you know, the rise of political movements and civil rights movements over time. So I think that from a cultural, like, generative and charitable perspective, we should just be aware of our inheritance and tradition, even for the purpose of critique and refining and moving it forward. But Augustine in particular, he's been a hero of mine, as we've talked about, and his Confessions is a landmark, greatest text of all time kind of book that's read in most universities, secular or faith-based. But I think the brilliance there is it's the first autobiographical reminiscence in Western civilization, maybe world history. And he's searching for self-knowledge himself. He wants to know who he is. He wants to know, and he says the treasure of your own memory is the storehouse you've been given to go kind of gather and collect a sense of self. But as he gets deeper and deeper in to the puzzles and paradoxes of trying to know who you are, he meets God there. He meets the author of his own life and realizes he isn't the narrator, but there's one higher than him. And that really, the mysterious opacity of trying to know who you are and what really motivates you and what the really key decisive things from your own personal history are that shape you in the present, he sees himself completely stuck and paralyzed without appealing to the grace and guidance of God to make sense of himself. And I just think that's like infinitely interesting as any human being, whether you believe in that God or not. And I also think it's like strangely like modern and contemporary as we're in this great age of like trying to figure out what is the self and how does the self get expressed in an authentic way. I mean, those are the same questions we're asking, 1600 years later.
Yeah, it's so cool just to see him write in the way that he writes and to think that you have permission to mature and you have permission to reflect back on, hey, once I thought this, and then I met someone who introduced me to somebody else and I came under their teaching and I realized that formerly I thought that. And that just was a breath of fresh air. Like you go, oh, well, if Augustine can reflect back and see development and the progression of ideas and the coming to terms with things, if he can wrestle through that, then I can take a deep breath and go, oh, that same process is possible for me. And not just possible, but it is the story of becoming mature as a human person. And what a great invitation. And it not new, right? And that, I think that expressive individualism that you mentioned earlier, the burden to like design my identity and the weight of that versus looking at, back at somebody who had such a tremendous mind and heart, going, they were trying to discover something rather than design something. And if we put that equal effort that or the pressure that we feel to make ourselves something, if we said, that's not the burden I need to carry. Instead, I can have a joyful exploration of what it is to be a human and that treasure and storehouse of memory to go back and go, what is the story of my life? And I think that's
And
great.
I think too, it's like as we've lost touch with the sources of the invisible interior self, the soul, which you, as far as we can tell, you can't fully put it under the microscope yet. As we lose touch with those sources, which are often in writing, in books like the Confessions, or in scripture, obviously, or in practices in the community of faith, we become a completely materialistic society, but also an exteriorized society where everything is about the external and exterior part of your life and presentation of yourself. And so, for the self to be real, it has to be posted on the internet. It has to be recognized. It has to be achieved and performed. And there was a great article in the Atlantic a few years ago about the rise of workism as the new religion of the age. It's like it's not I think therefore I am and Descartes, it's I work therefore I am. I do. It has to be external because there's no interior castle or treasure of the soul to even go on this journey like Augustine goes on. What an immensely horrendous pressure to put on people, on a generation of the young, going into college. And what a competitive, graceless society because it's a zero-sum competition. Not everybody can be the best author. Not everybody can have all those followers, on Twitter. So it's to say that I think to be a community of grace and of humor and of failure requires that you have an understanding of the soul and of the inner
Mhm.
person. And our culture's swiftly losing touch with it. And I fear the drift of education toward pure career, pure workism, pure performance,
Mhm.
pure like quantifiable metrics deplete and destroy. And so all those communication or all those concentric circles of self and family and church and all those were communities, organizations, institutions devoted to the tending and nurture of the whole person, not just the external performing self. And I think that's the cultural like moment we're stuck in.
Yeah, so well said. I am, as you talk, thinking about Joseph Pieper's work in Leisure as the Basis of Culture, and when he writes of a total work culture and just the tyranny of total work versus contrasted against divine festival and the reality that reality itself is a divine festival, and the idea that the first day of the week, the highest human participation is divine festival, and everything flows downstream from rest and festival. and that we've tried to replicate or imitate that to amuse ourselves or entertain ourselves in the midst of a total work culture, trying to retain festival because it's woven into who we are as beings, but with no reason to retain it. It becomes shallow entertainment paralleled with total work culture. And I mean, it's brilliant in insight to say, and this is what I'm hopeful for parents, pastors, everybody listening to this conversation, is there is a way of thinking that isn't trapped within that cycle, and there is a way of stepping back, looking back, that says, hey, we can be helpful to look forward. So you're doing that work. I know I got to let you go, but as a parent, you and Nora prepping kids who are gonna head out and make some of these decisions, and you alongside them helping them make the decisions, what are two or three things that you are learning just as a parent when you and Nora sit down and the kids are out riding horses or whatever they're doing, that you guys are going, okay, hey, here's a couple things that we're going to set as priorities to help them make these decisions well? Are you putting pretty significant boundaries on technology? Are you trying to introduce them to experiences and opportunities that might whet an appetite? Like, how are you approaching that preparation from middle high school to help get them ready to think well about that formation in university life?
That's I We'll just have to keep this one going because I want to hear what I think I would learn more if you answered that question. But um I I we've been trying to be proponents of leading with the positive and whetting the appetite for the real, rather than policing and monitoring, the virtual, which doesn't mean we've had guidelines. I mean, no phones until high school, no social media until we haven't crossed that bridge yet, probably 16 or whatever the kind of reigning guidelines are. But man, it can really poison your relationship with your kid when you're just like trying to keep up with when they're texting so and so or jumping on the computer. So even if it's a no phone culture, it's like they can hop on the computer and do YouTube, and it's just the ubiquity of it. So yeah, we've leaned into a household that has a big garden and let our girls get a horse. And a lot of these things are privileges and luxuries that we have given where we live and the life we have. But I think you can do them in big and small ways, whether it's athletic competition or neighborhood, sort of get togethers. I think just like continuing to lead with the moments of real embodiment. We have dinner around the table every night together, the really simple things where it's just like, yeah, we talk and they know what the question's going to be about their day, and you're going to have human to human conversations and you're going to ask questions. I do think though it's the bigger rhythm of Sabbath, of feast that you were talking about. That can be harder. I think just as there's a rediscovery of the spiritual disciplines and the rule of life for us as Christians to kind of do the reformation or counterformation. I think we need to do that as a community. It's not just about your own personal relationship with Jesus and spirituality. It's about community, beginning with your family. And I love the discovery of the ancient habits and calendar rhythms, but it also can feel like one more thing that your family's trying to pull off as a little boutique, sort of thing. So how can you get broader swaths of neighbors or communities or your church culture to have ways of like, no, this is a hard season of fasting and self-sacrifice and dying to self. And now we're heading into this really beautiful season of just like sensuous, just enjoyment of all, like, and obviously the church was doing that with Advent and Christmas and Lent and Easter. And so there's some big ones to draw on. But I think that's the challenge, because otherwise I think the spiritual curation of self or family through the rediscovery of some of these habits and practices can just be one more kind of like individualist American pursuit, versus a really like thick fabric that weaves a community together. So I don't know, we're trying those things, but yeah, I think it's keeping in touch with the real over the virtual, and keeping in touch with the relationship over just the isolationist tech information and entertainment dive. It's those basic things. I don't know. You leave me with one good thought from the Elliott household. Save me.
uh, Hey, it's the table for us, that time around the table. And we invested in a table to just say that is, if there's only one thing that we can really anchor for our kids, and there's more than that, we're fortunate in that way, but we want to start with the table. And I think that's great for everybody, and regardless of our one bedroom apartment. I remember we started out in a one bedroom apartment, and if that becomes the center and it widens out from there, something really beautiful happens, because it is embodied. It's real, not actual. It's relational. It's taste and see. It's celebration. It's grieving. It's questions. It's exploration. So I think that's it for us, is trying to hold that, which is tough for kids, teenagers, life. And so you do have to fight for it. I mean, we do have to fight for that time, and we have to say no to things that are goods in order to bet on a long-term vision of human flourishing that says, I could give you this in the short term and it would be an immediate good, but it's not going to form you for your life with your husband, wife, kids, neighbors, if you don't have a capacity and a desire. But it's a whetting the appetite. You got to make it rich. You got to make it whole and fun, and the sensory experience really beautiful, to the possibility that you can, because you microwave some snacks and don't talk and demand that kids sit at the table, they're going to be like, YouTube is better. So, hey, I think I got to let you go, but the most brilliant thing maybe that we can put a pin in, and I keep coming back and asking for more of your time, but that what you just said about that burden to create that sense of communal festival that reflects reality falling to the individual family rather than the church, brilliant. And brilliant too, because it's not the university's job, it's not the state's job, and I don't think it's the individual family's job. I believe that it is the church who's the keeper of time, and the light that that gives, whether it's on a university, it gives light to all the other sciences. If the church is inviting into divine festival, pointing to ultimate reality, inviting back into a posture of rest and recalibration, then it doesn't feel exactly like you just said. It's individualistic. It's on our family. We curate our own personal version of this. And then it feels like one more disconnected thing that our neighbor's doing some other version of. And it's still expressive individualism and now some religious version of that, versus a reality that's expressed in community. And the church is the one that, nobody else is going to do that. That's our job as the church. So maybe we'll revisit that. I don't know.
Revisit that one. That is its own episode, but you just said it brilliantly. So, man, thank you
Yeah.
for having me on here.
Joseph, it's so good to see you. And for everybody listening, go look at George Fox. It gives me great hope, Joseph, to think like these kind of conversations are just so rich and they're like refreshing for the soul. And I think it's why I'm with you that universities, great universities, are such a gift, because we can't have 10,000 Josephs. I mean, you read that academic resume of yours and just the life experience. God called you to participate in something that would let you help distribute something. And the mechanism for distributing that is a university. That's the intention, is that hundreds of people can go to George Fox University and participate in something that's being orchestrated under the conducting wisdom of somebody like you. So I just am super grateful for you, super grateful for George Fox, super hopeful for the future. I've got a niece who I think is going to end up at George Fox very, very soon. So I'm so happy about that. And no matter where you are in the world, just look up George Fox University. I have super high confidence in Joseph, in the school, and where they're headed the last 11 years with what the introduction of the Great Books program. And my personal bias is you can't put it in a more beautiful part of the world. So you're gonna be eating blackberries and paddling that river. So anyway, Joseph, thank you. So good to see you, and keep up the great work. We'll be praying for George Fox and your work, and I will come back and we'll visit Divine Festival. Maybe that'll be good.
Oh, man, be great. Thanks for having me, Zach.